This is part 2 of Ideology and Democracy. In part 1, the general landscape was laid out between these two major forces. They're elemental, really. The so-called political spectrum, which is supposed to be from left to right wing, does not encompass much beyond shades of authoritarianism or utopianism. The real spectrum lies between democracy and authoritarianism. And I'm now going to look at the nature of democracy. There'll be several aspects to be covered. One with the argument that it is the most powerful political system, and as such on the principle that the strongest wins. That alone justifies democracy. But let's have a look at where this power comes from, and more importantly, how democracy manages to engage with society. This is significant because, contrary to ideological belief, society makes politics. Politics does not make society. Authoritarians like the latter notion because it gives them some kind of moral superiority to justify what is essentially an unjustifiable, inefficient and inhumane political leaning. Society is in the intersubjective, and in it there are entities which can be inconsistent. This is a very different, or contradictory, this is a very different scene from physical reality, where something that's black cannot be black and white at the same time. It's fairly basic. So in the intersubjective, there is a capacity to accommodate contradiction, inconsistency, and any amount of human hypocrisy, which is almost part of the human condition. Anyone who claims that they've never been a hypocrite is as stupid, as I was a little boy, saying I've never been proven wrong. It's laughable. The important thing is to be able to come to terms with this hypocrisy, either to contain it, but at least respect that we're all frail and all liable to be not quite perfect. More so, anyone who claims to be perfect is either a liar or deluded. Or a machine, maybe. I don't know. But they're certainly not on the right track. So, society is intersubjective. Now, I did make a mistake in the first part of this, at one point, to talk about or imply that there are non-entities in the intersubjective. That's wrong. There are entities that can be inconsistent and contradictory, as I mentioned. So that's a slip of the tongue. It's very easy when your culture is so strong to slide into expressing things in an inappropriate way, because the way so many things are framed relies on mistaken philosophical assumptions and beliefs, in this case from the age of reason, in the belief that somehow or other contradiction cannot be taken seriously, and any contradiction should be, by the law of non-contradiction in logic, rejected. Well, we all know that's a very limiting, and I hope you do now, very limiting and dogmatically destructive attitude, because just to be able to reason itself, we have to take contradiction seriously and give it at least temporary status of meaning something to avoid it from imploding on itself. So that's quite important. A lot of people have difficulty grasping this, but the word contradiction, if you're to be entirely logical, must be rejected totally, which of course, in a way, would make the law of non-contradiction itself nonsense. That's the paradox of logic. So we get out of that by, at least temporarily, being illogical to be able to use logic. Or out by the third paradox of reasoning. You had to be unreasonable to be reasonable. So that's very important. And as rationality is at the heart of human agency, because an intended action has to be one where you have thought about it and reasoned before you act. Denial of reason and denial of contradiction renders a human, in effect, without agency. It doesn't really do that, but theoretically it does that. And any political theory that goes to that extent is essentially inhuman. Now, democracy doesn't do that. Democracy is not utopian. It respects contradiction and hangs on the principle of compromise. And that is, as I've said before, and it's absolutely essential that the cost of compromise must always be less than the cost of non-cooperation. It's a very fundamental principle. So democracy calls for a certain amount of culture, of belief. These things are intersubjective, must be shared between people to avoid the collapse of democracy into tyranny of the majority, or just chaos of people unwilling to agree with each other. And that's very important. It's socially very important. Otherwise, if you permit that, what is called multiculturalism actually is a form of multi-societism, nasty word, which is unpleasant as it is impossible, because in reality what happens is that you find within ghettos or enclaves in an area occupied by people of legacy culture, you have a form of colonization. It follows, it's quite natural. I mean, why should people be forced to change fundamentals of their culture and society to align with those that they may detest to the bottom of their hearts, particularly as they've been welcomed in, apparently, by the very culture that they cannot countenance. This is quite critical. Now, essentially, all human rights, all law, all justice depends upon society, and it rests upon the ability of the system to make them real. Without society, you don't have any politics. It doesn't exist. The authoritarians, of course, think, well, the solution is, if you have social problems, you try and change society to make it behave. The ideologues and our authoritarian will go further and say, no, what you do is you destroy society and culture, reduce people to, as it were, blank slates, and then inculcate them with ideology. And their project is, it's quite nakedly so, as you can tell, to do that in this country now. Except they're given a sort of pass to new arrivals. But in due course, the new arrivals will face the same authoritarian or totalitarian methods. They're only being used now to divide. It's a very, very nasty scene. Anyway, back to democracy. So democracy, because democracy can handle disagreement through principle of compromise, it's ideally suited to engage with society, which is riddled with contradiction, inconsistency, incoherence, as well as a lot of good stuff too. There's no doubt about that. And of course abstractions. And for some, society is full of abstractions beating the living dead out of each other. And they feel that needs to be dealt with. Individuals are the only place where agency comes from. This is critical. Part of the ideological conjuring trick is to somehow amputate agency from people, turning them into sort of robots almost, and then bagging it up and taking it over to the intersubjective and ascribing it to various abstractions, which I've mentioned. It's quite systematic, and it is impossible. But the theory, ideological theory, dictates that it is not only possible but necessary. So the mistake that's going on is there is a conflation between the intersubjective and physical reality. And of course, this gets very complicated because the laws of existence in the intersubjective are not the same as those of physical reality, because you can have inconsistent and incoherent entities in the intersubjective, whereas you can't have in physical reality. And of course, the subjective, which creates intersubjective, is interesting as far as conscious thought is concerned. Incoherence is very difficult, if not impossible. You can obviously change your mind or be addled by the way you think, giving a seeming incoherence, that's true. But in terms of focused consciousness, that's impossible. However, in the vast bulk of our memory, per the second paradox of reason, there's a vast amount of memory of which we're not conscious, but it's there, which is inconsistent and incoherent. If we were to try to apply the rules of logic to everything we see, think, feel, all impressions, in about 10 seconds our brains would freeze up because of overload. You'd be asking our mental function to be processing a tidal wave of stuff, and it just wouldn't be able to do it. So we don't do it. We only apply logic to those areas that are immediately useful with everyday thought, or if you're a philosopher like me and a few others, try and extend it a bit further. But normal human beings don't do that, and they don't need to do it. Why should we force people to be philosophers? We're a small bunch of obsessives who think we've got a duty to try and make the world a better place. To that extent, we share the arrogance of ideologues. I have no doubt that these sort of little talks might seem very prosy and, you've got to learn something and we don't listen, your silly fools approach. That's happened. It's a paradox of trying to do something. And if I couldn't do this, doubtless I'd be useless to everything else. And if you're a member of society, you've got to at least try and do the bit. Anyway, on top of this, democracy is interesting because it is a very good system of information flow. People elected in are disciplined by the thought, because it's only temporary, that they may be thrown out next time. That's good. It must make them think a bit. Unfortunately for the ideologues, it doesn't. And with our current, still the remains of the Uniparty, they used to watch each other's backs. There was a sort of unholy alliance of vested interest between MPs of different parties. The business as usual. Then along came all these fringe parties and angry parties. It's fully justified anger, in my opinion. And times are changing. But we still have the threat of ideology, and it's very severe. Burnham is much more of a pure ideologue than Starmer was. And he's a sort of ideologue who believes that markets and supply and demand should not be respected because they are key to the problem which socialism can deal with and make a world a better place. So in the process of making the world a better place, you need to abandon what he sees possibly as irrational respect for the markets. You just ignore them. And that'll be part of the socialist solution, somehow to square the circle, to be able to create something from nothing. It's a very strange belief, but it's very strong, particularly if people feel that there's a virtue attached to it, and that there's a sort of emotional loyalty to their ideology. And when you get to that stage, it's very hard to do much about it. There's no doubt that people worship the markets or put them centre of their political theories can, in effect, cause the most terrible injustice and misery, so on and so forth. But I'm going to suggest more about democracy, which gives you another way of looking at things. The expression for power is critical. People talk about, the power of good speech, the power of this, but they're not. Power is a construct. And it's a result of metamorphoses in society and politics, but not in physics. It's another thing. Even in physics is a construct. In electricity, power, I should say watts, is a result of voltage times amperage. So volts and amps are necessarily involved in power, in physics, in electricity in your house or whatever. So, and in society, it's information and authority, when combined, metamorphose into political and social power. So it follows that any political system that's good at information flow and good at ascribing authority to those who can best use that information in a process of combination metamorphosis into power is the best system. Well, ideology is hopeless at that, because ideology doesn't like contradiction. Anyone who steps out of line, bingo, you're a non-person. Or worse, you have to be disposed of. A bit of re-education might do the job, but that's not very important really. Underneath, this essence of ideology is radical inhumanity. And yet, many ideologues think it's exactly the opposite. They're so inculcated and blind. There's a sort of artificial stupidity on steroids. It is ironic in extreme and very sad to see well-meaning, intelligent, highly educated people with sort of Pol Pot inclinations. Because that's what it comes down to in the end. They often, the gentility, there's a sort of genteel violence which you come across occasionally, where nice, in apostrophe, people hold political opinions and beliefs that are, when you strip it all away and look at them, elementally inhuman. To the bottom of their hearts, they think they're being good and virtuous, when in reality, stripping aside their good intentions and wish for a better world, they're vile, dangerous, and in desperate need of understanding fundamentals of democracy and respect for people, instead of blind respect for a political theory. It's as bad as that. So democracy is good at this information and authority flow thing. It's brilliant at it. And also because it contains the ability through compromise to respect disagreement, it's an excellent way of engaging with society. So democracy doesn't claim to make society good. What it's trying to do is to find what is best, what is the best that there can be done in the circumstances and from the state of society. It doesn't exist to implement what society wants, because if I try to do that, because society is contradictory, you're going to get chaos, and you're not going to get anywhere. But it's to try and make sense out of society. And MPs are therefore in an invidious and very difficult position. To be an MP, you need to know this sort of thing. You need to respect democracy. It's a highly sophisticated thing. And there's a dynamic element to it too, because there's no doubt that if you're trying to do the best in circumstances, there must need some kind of target. That's true. But unlike traditional utopianism, where the utopia to come is a fixed utopia, and all you need to do is to trottle along and apply the ideological rules and so on and so forth, get rid of the wreckers and the capitalists, push them out, if need be kill a few or all of them, ideally, so you're left with the pure and good, i.e. the people who've given up their agency totally and are robotically obedient to your commands and the commands of ideological perfection. God, what hell is that? All they think will be well, when in fact all will be hell. So, in the end, the choice is between democracy and ideology. Democracy is far more efficient in the generation of social and political power and the ability to get things done. It's also more humane because it doesn't dismiss reason, because it respects contradiction, which is essential. See the third paradox of reason. If you don't know what the paradoxes are, give me a shout. But they're sort of littered in previous posts that I've done. And this is long enough for now. But we desperately need highly educated, highly intelligent people to look at democracy very carefully and to produce full-blooded theory, or even just look at its nature, so that we can be armed against the ideologues. The ideologues have an unfair advantage because they have produced, the ideologues have produced an army of people with effectively the same button to press to make them act. So if you have a room full of committed Marxists, you are allowed to make some very, very weak joke, or indeed maybe inhuman allegation about a horrible capitalist, and the room will automatically, everybody will dissolve in cheers and hurrahs because the button has been pushed. So it's sort of created an army of robots because they've given up their agency to, and as it were, passed it over to an abstraction. So if someone says, I speak in the name of this abstraction, then they all act in unison. Ideology is extremely powerful like that. The good thing is, or, the saving grace, is that people who aren't so educated and, often not as intelligent, are much less easy to force into that form of inculcation. And that enrages the ideologues. And that's one of the explanations why, for instance, the Cross of St George, for the present football, there's a couple of county councils that have gone got High Court injunction to stop people flying these in public property or any lampposts or what have you. It's a sledgehammer, and it's because they are frightened. They're frightened that their adoring source of virtue, the thing that the altar which they kneel in front of, is to a false god. It's quite religious. So democracy is the best system for national, social power and cooperation. It's the best system for reflecting the fact that we're all different, and yet we all know that we have commonality in that difference. It's vastly more sophisticated. It reflects that inside our own brains there's a huge domain of non-logic. It's massive. And society itself is hugely important. It recognises that society makes politics and politics doesn't make society. Democracy is vastly superior. And those who diss it and blame it for all the wrongs are acting exactly the way the authoritarians want them to do, because they're destroying the only real alternative to authoritarianism, or one of the shades on the political spectrum of authoritarianism. Centrists are just as authoritarianism as far left or far right. It's just they want to do it in a slower and more manipulative way, a la, shall we say, Edward Bernays, the man of torches of freedom that got women to smoke in large numbers, when before it was only a vile male habit. So increased deaths rather radically in that way. Or the Guatemalan thing, or you can go on and talk about getting American soldiers to fight in the First World War, or he's the father of modern marketing and modern propaganda, which is developed much more, far beyond him, by the mid-20th century German politicians, and today is highly sophisticated with rather nasty little things like the nudge unit, which is really unpleasant. And now we have a government that's trying to force newspapers to register into Ipsos. They're desperate to close down democratic thought because they already know everything. And they assume that all the ills that come about is because of nasty old society making people horrid. So you just need to cut off the source of nastiness, which is what they call misinformation. Of course, the BBC and a few others are respected sources of information, which is odd, really, if you think about the way they handled poor old Princess Diana. I mean, it's an incredible scandal. It's off the scale. They most likely accelerated her death because of that. The People's Princess was murdered arguably, by the BBC. A respected source of information. We live in strange times, but democracy needs respect because it's a very clever system. I'll put up the third one shortly. Thank you so much for listening.